am a little suspicious of tonight's episode. Hey, it's Romania Black. I'm a little suspicious of episode 7 because normally I have all the Land of the Lustrous files saved on my computer, thanks to Liam Poles and some amazing people that download some files for me because this series has evaded the internet. And usually when I pull up the episode, it starts out with the credits or a black screen or something that doesn't seem quite ominous. When I pulled up tonight's episode, it is literally a shot of Phos's legs against a garish pink and yellow background, which makes me think that shit's about to go down. Because, yeah, last episode 6, was the first battle, which went as well as you think it will, in which Amethyst, the twins, were crushed and nearly taken away by the Moonanites, aka the lunar Solarians, and Phos and crew. Bortz has done a lot. Bortz has done the heavy lifting in this battle so far, but poor Phos, who is so convinced that their new legs would let them go into battle, and they basically was the leg version of Icarus, and just you flew too close to the lunar Solarians, and here we are. So I definitely was going to talk about the rule of 8 next week, but with Land of the Lustrous, it might be the rule of 7, rule of 8, rule of the rest of the season. In any case, I'm pretty excited to see what's going to be in this episode, but I'm also terrified. So I've got some comments I want to talk about before we start. So thank you all so much for commenting so much about this series. I get so excited when I get on and see all the comments. I'm like, yes. And then there have been a lot that have been flagged for spoilers. So if your comment just got a heart, that means that I didn't read it. That means that the mods were like, nope, that has a spoiler to the manga or a spoiler to the series that you will find out later. So I didn't read those, but I did read a lot of comments, and there were some really good ones, and I want to talk about them. A lot of them I'm going to say verbatim because the comments were so good. I was like, I can't really reword this. So excuse me while I go through this little series of comments before we start. Gwilla 5637 says, I haven't paid much attention to the other gems' usages, but Diamond and Bort's personalities match with their everyday use in the world. Like how Diamond is usually used for engagement rings and connects to being a bit of a romantic and emotional person, wearing their heart on their sleeve, which kind of ties to how we've seen Diamond so far. Bort is used in abrasive coatings for drill bits and other cutting machinery and can be connected to how they are very work focused and a fierce fighter. Unlike most gems, Bort's is not commonly gifted to a loved one, but used to protect a tool's edges, which ties very much to Bort's personality, so that's really cool. Also, they note that you can buy Bort's for a pretty low price at $3.50 a carat, while a diamond is around $1,200 to $8,900 per carat. So Bort's is so useful and so handy and the thing that we need, which is why they're in, why they're like a commodity, but at the same time then Diamond, who is maybe not as useful as a precious stone. So I thought that was a really interesting analysis of the two of them. As much as I love Cinnabar and Phos, Diamond and Bort's are like my jam. They are my ship jam. They are giving me so much, and I can compare them to a couple in Heaven of Vigil's Blessing. I can compare them to a couple in another series. There's just lots I can compare with, and I'm super excited about that. So thank you, Aguila. That was really good. Flipnote pointed out that Congo, aka Adamant, I don't know what Congo means. I don't think we've talked about Congo. I don't know what that's for. Says that Adamant wears gloves anytime that they are touching the gems, probably because they're much harder than them. And we talked about this a few episodes ago, I think. We see all the gems put on gloves. I thought this was interesting when handling certain items or pieces of others, likely to avoid cracking or scraping themselves or each other. Bortz and Daya also seem to wear them at all times on their arms and legs for presumably the same reason. Rutal is the same, being the doctor. Yeah, I just, after they said that, I was like, oh yeah, Flipnote, you're right. We do see them wear gloves and like the high socks and everything quite often. That's probably the reason why. Moomin points out, so the story is that you almost got the title correct for the sci-fi story by PK Dick. It is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? I was like, I knew it had something to do with electric sheep, and I was like, what is it? And it's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The one-word summary of the story is empathy, which is something that the gemstones, some of them have, some of them not so much. And the great story is that, of course, they made that into a movie called Blade Runner. I love Blade Runner. Blade Runner is so freaking good. Even the 2049 version, I love Blade Runner so much. The moments in the rain, I know a lot of it's ad-libbed, but him with the dove in the rain, the tears in the rain, like that whole scene, her big 40s hairdo. I'm like, yes. I love that movie so much. It's so good. Both of them are really good. I like them both. Moomin says, so I looked up admirabilis, so you didn't have to get spoiled. Thank you. That means so much. And says, it has a Latin root, which means admirable, to admire and to wonder. It's quite nice, actually. We do get the explanation of the bone, body, and spirit in this episode, which was way back in like episode 4. It doesn't seem that long ago, but it also seems 5,000 years ago. So it answers some questions and raises others. So I looked up the shell that is depicted, and it's called a murex shell. I remember seeing it in an article about rare shells and thinking it was beautiful looking. It's very delicate and lacy, so it fits right in with these creatures. This is just a reminder, but pearls are considered gems, and the only ones made by a living thing, organic gems. I hadn't even thought of pearls until you mentioned that, and I was like, oh yeah. Because we had, I think of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. So it was like, of course. Yeah. So a pearl would literally, my mind went into like 1,000 different places. And I was thinking, are we going to see a pearl and they be the like offspring of a gem and a living organism? And they're like the combination of, can Phos create pearls? I don't know how this works. Will she have a baby pearl with cinnabar? Who knows? Or they, these are gems. They're quite genderless. That's so fascinating. And my mind's like in a million places thinking of, will we see a pearl, and will it be this amalgamation of flesh and bone? Is it one step closer to getting to what the Lunarians want? I don't know. It's a lot of food for thought, but that is good to bring up. Will we see a pearl? Who knows? And then Alexandra Q finally says, considering that the gemstones are bones of humanity, I think it makes a lot of sense with the way they seem to almost be unchanging. Bones grow a lot in the first years of life, but after that initial exponential growth, they don't change for a long time. The gemstones seem to have undergone an initial exponential change, gaining bodies and sentience, but have stopped with their change for a long time, until we now see that Cinnabar and Dia are questioning their place in society. So it could be that, yeah, they've been the same for hundreds of years, thousands if you're Yellow Diamond, and now Cinnabar and Dia are kind of questioning. My question with that is, Yellow Diamond's been around for so long, but they've forgotten what they're fighting for. Is adamant going to be like, does adamant alter their memories or take out a chunk of their memories to make them stop questioning and they just go back to the way they were? That would be really sinister, but adamant's been a bit suspicious last episode, so I don't know. Maybe he wants to keep the status quo. I don't know. The Lunarians being the soul, though, them being the soul and carrying the very human need of being one again, of repeating the mistakes of the past, if you can call it a mistake, and wanting to defy nature, as I assume it's nature who separated humans into 3 beings to achieve their goals. Humanity doing foolish things? What are you talking about? Yeah, I'm like, oh, what? Humanity wouldn't do anything crazy, right? But I do really, really like the separation into 3 beings. I think that's such a cool world building thing, and I'm very intrigued to know exactly what they're going to do moving forward, because there's a lot to be done. I don't know how we're going to go about it. So I guess we're going to find out. But yeah, I've wasted nearly 10 minutes and this episode freaks me out already because I have no clue what to expect, but it not starting like it usually does and seeming ominous is not reassuring. So yeah, we're just going to start. It'll be fine. I did get the language track right, so that was good. I was like, ooh, it made me pause and go, oh, this is creepy. And then I was like, oh yeah, I need to get to the Japanese language track. So in any case, I do want to let you know that has been bugging me all day. I'm about to go on the first traveling tournament with our team because I coach a forensics team, and we're about to go travel for our first tournament. So wish us luck. And one of the students on the speech team, I looked in their cubby the other day and I told Discord this, I saw an art book that looked like Land of the Lustrous. And I was like, I thought I saw gemstones on the front of it, and one of them looked like Phos, and I was like, oh, but I haven't said anything yet because I know that once I say something, they'll be like, oh yeah, so then this plot point, I'll be like, ah! So I'm going to wait till I finish the series, and then I'm going to be like, can I like look at that art book? But that'll be after I finish the manga and the anime, so don't worry. I have a lot of self-discipline, and I'm very fearful of spoilers, so I have not told my student that I'm watching Land of the Lustrous yet, but I'm waiting until I finish the anime and then finish the manga, and then I'll be like, hey, that art book, do you care if I borrow that? So, it looks so pretty, but I do not want to open it until we know more. So, in any case, I hope you all enjoy episode 7 with me, but we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to start episode 7 of Land of the Lustrous, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and I'll see you all on the other side. Why? I have a very bad feeling. I have a very bad feeling, y'all, that I've been bamboozled. I have a very bad feeling that you all were like, oh, Romania. Oh, you should watch Land of the Lustrous. It's such a heartwarming little show. No. But maybe I wasn't bamboozled because you all made this the replacement for Berserk. No! Phos, why are you this way? Why are you letting these intrusive ice floes get to you? Stop the intrusive ice floes. So at this point, Phos lost a third of their memories to their legs. I would like to think that the arms aren't a third because it's just from the elbow down, but now their arms are lost as well. And I'm like, what memories were in those arms? What are we going to do with that? What are you going to replace it with? You don't have any more of the shell, so what are you going to do? So we had the agate or the agate from the shell to replace the legs, but what are you going to do about the arms? Why did you let me watch this? And next week's the rule of 8. Next week is the rule of 8. No. Next week's the rule of 8. And if you don't know what the rule of 8 is, if there's a 12 episode, 11 to 13 episode season or show on my channel, the 8th episode is always a crazy one. There have been few exceptions. They are few and far between. But for the most part, like it's a 90% certainty the 8th episode in a short series like this is going to be wild. And Phos just lost their arms. I'm sure they're going to remember Cinnabar, but my biggest fear is that, like, I'm going to be freaking heartbroken if by the end of this series, Phos's whole mission to get stronger so that they can save Cinnabar, they end up replacing all these body parts on them and make themselves better and evolve, but the cost is they forget Cinnabar. If that happens, I will riot. If that happens, I will chuck something out of this room that won't break something else. But no! The implications of this episode are frightening. What? And this whole episode, the whole time, for like 3/4 of it, I was like, well, this is cute, and this is nice, and this is quaint. And I was like, but where's the twist? And then you find out about the ice floes, and you're like, wait, what? So, this episode feels very fitting because it's horribly cold outside right now. I feel like I'm Antarcticite, but also, why are are you making me watch this to torture me? You wouldn't do that, would you? You wouldn't do that to me. You wouldn't do that to Romania. You wouldn't make me watch this show just for it to crush my spirits. You wouldn't do that, right? My brother hasn't seen this show, so he doesn't know. He doesn't know. He was just like, oh, okay. I don't like where this is headed. I don't like where this is headed at all. And I'm terrified of it. So anyway, so we get a recap. We get a recap from the beginning, and then we go to Amethyst, and then we can put it back together. I am surprised they were able to put Amethyst and then back together so quickly. Although we don't really, the one thing about the series that's interesting is we don't exactly get a concept for time. We don't get a concept for time. So that's interesting. But yeah, I'm still floored. I'm still floored, honestly. Blah. But yeah, so we don't get a concept for time and how it works in this show. And maybe it took them quite a while to get Amethyst put back together, and we just don't know, because the gemstones don't seem to even have a concept for time. Their concept is like, oh yeah, we go into hibernation for a while because there's only like 10 days of sunlight out of all this time and everything like there. So they have concept of days, but they've been around for hundreds of years. So they don't really, to them, it may have taken them no time to put Amethyst back together, but in the reality and grand scheme of things, it may have taken months or weeks or days, who knows? But I am glad that they did put Amethyst back together. And I'm also really glad that Amethyst was okay. They weren't mad at Phos at all. And I love the fact that when they wake up, Phos has been there, like hovering over them. And they're like, also, I love their painted toenails. Phos is like, I wasn't able to move. And I just stood there. And that's when they say that they're sorry. They're like, we were careless. We were too eager to set an example for you. You were scared because of us. I thought that was so interesting because I honestly wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting Amethyst and them to immediately apologize and be so open about it. One thing that's interesting is that Amethyst seems to be directly different than Antarcticite. So you have Antarcticite. Antarcticite. I've been told by some people in the Discord to not look up things on all the stones because it might be spoilery, so I feel like this might be one of those times. Their name seems pretty cut and dry, right? It seems pretty cut and dry. And their idea of them being a liquid until it's cold enough for them to become a solid, that seems pretty good. Although there's lots of foreshadowing in this episode when Antarcticite keeps saying, oh, I'm not quite as strong as I could be because it's not cold enough. I'm like, is the sun going to come out and the Lunarians are going to come out and Antarcticite isn't going to be strong enough to do anything? That is absolutely terrifying. So, yay. But yeah, Antarcticite and Amethyst seem to have different ways of trying to teach and mentor Phos. So Amethyst's whole thing was to try to set an example that Phos could follow, right? There are two different leader styles and two different like teaching styles. Amethyst was very much a look at what I do and like monkey see, monkey do, doing one of those things. And it was kind of like a hands off, like Amethyst seemed more hands off and was like, look, watch us and how we destroy the bad guys. And then you'll be able to just be there on backup. And because they didn't take care of Phos in that moment, who was a newbie, it ended up backfiring on them. Antarcticite, to their credit, is very much more hands on. And is like, okay, watch me, see me, and then now I'm going to teach you and push you to do it. You've seen me and seen what I can do. Now I'm going to make sure that you can do it as well. Don't just follow me as an example. I want to make sure you can keep up with me. And it's a very different style, and I liked it a lot. I like Antarcticite as a character an awful lot, and I'm terrified that they're not going to be in the show very long. So I'm like, no, especially if Phos keeps losing their limbs. So no. But I thought that was really sweet that Amethyst and them did apologize. Then we have Alexandrite, which I think it's interesting. Alexandrite wants to be called Lexi instead of Alex, which is kind of cool. But they seem to be like, they want to know more about the Lunarians. And so apparently Lexi gets constantly worked up about the Lunarians. And they said, I heard its blades were made from sapphire. Now, there's a very good chance that Lexi knew who Sapphire was. And that's, an issue. And they want to know, like, what was going on. I think it's rather weird that the Lunarians are being made from, they're making, let me get this right. The Lunarians are trying to get the gemstones. They're making weapons from the gems that they are collecting. Because, yeah, on the surface, it sounds like when Barry was talking about it, on the surface, it sounds so wholesome. It's like, oh, well, the Lunarians just want to combine, the gems and the organisms back to make humanity whole once again. That all sounds fine and dandy. But then when you actually see, you're like, oh, wait, they're enslaving the flesh and they are turning bone into weapon. That doesn't sound as wholesome anymore. And you're like, I don't know. Humanity be weird about things. What? That's never happened. I do think it's really creepy that they're talking about using their friends as weapons, but we're going to talk about stuff that's even more creepy here in a little bit. So we'll get that. And of course, Amethyst and them, they're like, it happened so fast and we were so close, we didn't quite remember. But then they asked if Phos remembered. And by that point, Phos has left because, and I don't blame Phos for leaving because that was a deeply traumatic event for them. So why would they want to stick around and be questioned on their trauma and be like, hey, could you relive all of that trauma again? And I think it says something for Phos. We've seen that Phos has become almost more and more like a being, right? They get more, they're not hibernating like a non-human, because humans don't hibernate. They're not wanting to hibernate like the non-humans. They want to stay awake and they want to work. And they're also like being able to speak with nature and hear nature. And they're being able to like have all these organic parts with them and everything. So I thought that was really interesting. And to me, I feel like Phos is much more empathetic already than Amethyst is, because Amethyst is like, oh, well, Phos could recount the whole thing. And I'm like, oh, you would want them to relive their trauma? But they don't see it that way. They just see it as something objective, like, oh, Phos would know, so have them speak up about it. And I love the idea of Phos running away. Again, have flock of seagulls in my head. But Phos is like, I need to be able to run like this when I'm needed and not back down or shy away. The irony is that Phos is like, oh, I need to run when I'm needed. But then when they get to Cinnabar, who they should run to and support, they're like, oh, well, I don't know if I can talk to Cinnabar right now. And I'm like, son of a bitch, you better talk to that damn gemstone before you forget about them. And if you forget about them, I'm going to flip a gasket. If this is all some tragic story about these two that should be together and they end up forgetting one another or some shit like that, I will flip. No, sorry, Bob. Don't you do that to me, show. Don't you do that to me. Don't you break my heart like that. And of course, the saddest thing about all of this is that Phos says, I don't have anything to say to Cinnabar. But in my head, I'm like, you don't need to say anything to Cinnabar. You just need to be there for Cinnabar. Can you do that? And nope. I'm like, it sucks. So, and Cinnabar doesn't want to hibernate with all of them. So I wonder if Cinnabar has become kind of aware that stuff is going on and maybe they just don't want to deal with it anymore. I like the fact they close up. So they close up everything for hibernation and put all these sheets down. I love the idea that Red Barrel is making them all fashion, which is super cute. And it almost seems like, it feels like they're being put up into storage for the winter, like bundled up into their little cloths and put into a little Tupperware dish and shoved away for the winter, which is essentially what they're doing. The thing is, they can move around, which is wild. But I also wanted Phos to go and give Cinnabar the blankets and everything, but no, Rutile has to go do it. I'm like, I wanted more. That's the one thing that I'm so frustrated about this series. I wanted Phos to try to interact with Cinnabar more and more, but instead they're distancing themselves more and more, and it's so frustrating. I'm like, no, go to Cinnabar right now, please. Do this before you forget about them. But yeah. And so then I didn't know what that sprig was that was sticking out of Phos for a while. I'm like, are you growing like organic material out of you? But no, it looked like it was just a piece of fabric or something, because the sprig ended up getting taken away later. And they're like, you were the first to sleep and the last to get up every year. But this year's different because Phos has encountered other parts of organisms. And there we go. The light quality here is poor, and staying awake is exhausted. So the gemstones get their strength from the sunlight, which is also in the Lunarians' attack, which makes sense. But they only get about 10 sunny days in winter, and the Lunarians will surely show up. So Phos is like, well, why can't I stay out and protect? And then I loved, oh my God, the forging of Antarcticite is so gorgeous. The animation was stunning. I was gagged. It was so good. I love the idea that they're in this pool. What a lonely existence, though. What a lonely existence that they live in this little pool of water all year long, except for winter when they crystallize to form this body and they end up going to help out. Their body, honestly, of all of the bodies so far, their body seems the most traditionally masculine in a way, and maybe it's their facial features. It just seems more so than the other gemstones, which is interesting to me, especially in their design. But I love Antarcticite. I think they look great. So we have the wall of blankets. I wanted to do a close-up of seeing all of them. Okay, so they all look super cute. They have like these kimonos made of the cloth and fabric, which is great. Bort's is my favorite design. The hair all up in this big updo with the sleeves. It looks so good. I love the little pigtails on Daya. I love Jade's bow. They look like Sailor Jupiter. I love all of them, but Bort's is by far my favorite. Their outfit is so good. I love it. I would love to see a whole cosplay of all of them in these outfits, but that would be very, very hard. But yeah. And so then they all just plop down like they're going to sleep. They look like they're on display, like a bunch of little dolls on display. And Adamant seems like they go to sleep sometimes, but also stay awake, which is interesting. Cinnabar doesn't even open the pillows or the blankets because Cinnabar doesn't care about their existence, and I want to cry. And I'm like, please care about your existence, please. Please. Which is terrifying, right? I feel like this episode should have had a suicide hotline warning, honestly, when we got to the intrusive ice floes. Because it's like, no, don't think about taking your life, Phos. That's terrifying. But we'll talk about that scene when we get to it. Rutal with the bow looks cute. And then, yeah, Bort's with all of the hair is so massive. I love it. Also, they have like a cut sleeve design, which for Donmai is interesting, if you know the terminology. So Adamant has fixed the table that he wrecked. Also, what's interesting is that Adamant in their sleep like headbutts and could be the cause of a lot of the structural damage of the building, which is fascinating to me. What's also interesting is if you just put a sheet over them, they stop, which is, I guess, is the dark, like the ultimate darkness there. So then we have Antarcticite. I love their design. I love them as a character so much. And all they want, because Adamant's like, you must be lonely every year. And Antarcticite's like, no, I'm not lonely, but I do want to do our tradition of letting me give you a hug. I'm like, oh, that's all Antarcticite wants is just a hug to Adamant. Okay, that's not heartbreaking at all or sad at all that that's all they get. And then Adamant does the head pats. I'm like, it's so weird. But yeah, they just give a head pat. And Phos is like, oh, you get hugs? So Phos can't sleep. And Antarcticite is used to doing their duty by themselves with Adamant's help. And Adamant's like, I'd actually like to sleep again, since it's something I've been doing lately. So you guys can all work together. And of course, Phos thinks this is the greatest thing. And Antarcticite's like, fine. So they're like, your impulsiveness makes you aimless. Were you just here for another idle year? Your long festering doubts. There seems to be something there. Like Antarcticite is like, Antarcticite talks about like long festering doubts and like all of this aimless wandering. And it feels like they're talking about a version of Phos that we haven't seen. So again, with Phos losing some of their memories, it does make Phos kind of an unreliable narrator. And everybody else are kind of unreliable narrators because they don't keep track. They lose track of time and how and if anyone changes. So that all fascinates me so much. But I feel like Antarcticite, I don't know if they were just making guesses about Phos or if they've known them for so long. And then they realize that their legs have changed. And they're like, well, I did get in trouble, but then I had my legs replaced. And so Antarcticite talks about how working in groups is a problem, which is interesting and probably justification for why they work alone so much. But then Phos says, nobody blamed me, and that's why I couldn't sleep. I love when Antarcticite points the sword at Phos, and that's when Phos tells him that, which makes so much sense because Phos is like, I'd rather you have been mad at me and yelled at me, but just trying to be soft for my sake and take pity on me and just, not get mad at me feels almost worse. It's like that I'm not mad, I'm disappointed sort of perspective. And I could see why Phos is like, I just hate that. So what do we do about it? So Antarcticite kind of feels bad for Phos. and decides, fine, you and I will work together. But I love the little squiggly line where Phos is struggling to keep up, and Antarcticite's just like, I do this every year. I've saved up all my energy for this. We're totally fine. And Phos is like, what the world? So, okay, they go to the ice floes, right? They go to the ice floes and get over there. We take quite a long time to get there. And then we have what Phos is like, oh, is that a Lunarian? Because it looks like a cross / like sunspot, right? And Phos is like, is that a Lunarian? And then Antarcticite's like, no, it's just an ice floe. And they're like, a floe? It says, when the sea freezes over, any segments with microorganisms from the sea wind up like that. Well, we know that the gemstones are created from organisms kind of in the sea. They just rose to the top and went back on land. So while everybody is sleeping, we have Animate and Antarcticite for the 10 days of fighting against the Lunarians, right? So then we have the ice floes. What we know of the ice floes is that they are the sea with life that is frozen. And they just, freeze over, and they've got microorganisms. So, I mean, I think of I think of the gemstones, they did say all of humanity went to the sea, split up, and then some rose back to the surface and some stayed in the sea. And it says, but the master once called them sinners. The ice floe as sinners. Well, that's ominous. Why would Adamant call the ice floe sinners unless they have something to do with sentient bodies? I don't know if Adamant has this idea of like the 3-tiered system that you have, like the Lunarians are up above in the sky, and then the gemstones are down here on Earth, and then you have like the sea is supposed to be representing hell. So does Adamant have this philosophy that it's kind of like the gemstones are like the new earthlings. They are the new human realm. And then the Lunarians are like the deities in the sky, but we don't need to be up there with them because they might be sinister. And then the organisms down at the sea, they weren't worthy to come up to the top. They were punished by being forced to stay at the bottom, like sinners, like in hell. That's kind of what I see it as, that he's referring to them like, oh, you weren't able to evolve and come up to land like we were. You're stuck down there in hell because you're sinners. Adamant clearly knows lots of things that he's not conveniently telling us, and they are keeping it very close to the vest. And I want to know your secrets, Adamant. So yeah, so the organisms, the ice floes fall back into the sea after being frozen, and they're screeching. And at first, I was like, this sounds like something yelling in pain. But then Antarcticite was like, oh no, it's just, they're just frozen and they make that screeching sound. I'm like, okay. That was before this went all Pocahontas, and like every living creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. Like before we got to that point, I was like, oh, well, okay, so it's just a natural phenomena occurring that makes a screeching sound. It's like when you're driving down the road and the road seems to whistle. It's like, oh, the road's not actually physically whistling. It's just the wind and the sound and the way that it goes in between these surfaces. I'm like, oh, it's just a natural phenomena. Nothing to be haunted by. Nothing to be worried about. And Antarcticite's like, well, in order to stop them from screaming, we have to kill the icebergs. The thing that gets me is that the icebergs, their whole reason for stopping the icebergs is so that they don't make too much noise, which was kind of weird to begin with. I'm like, why don't you take all the fabric and instead of making everyone gowns, you make them some earmuffs? Why don't you make them some earmuffs and earplugs instead of gowns? And then we've got this whole problem solved. But I was like, is that really worthy of just destroying all these? I'm like, and you have to do it every year? It almost seems like the ice gets a conscience of its own, and it's trying to like evolve and possibly push its way to the surface, and you're preventing that from happening, is kind of what it sounds like. But who knows? In any case, Antarcticite ends up like crushing all the ice, and Phos is like, wow, this was a lot of work for one day. I didn't know what was in the bowl that Phos was like leaning their head in. It looked like if it was part of them or if it was just a reflection on them. But Phos says my legs are all that are useful. And what ends up happening is that Antarcticite says, you're more than just your legs. You are useful, but if you fall into the sea, you'll be ground to dust by the ice floes. Which I thought was a weird thing to begin with. They're like, oh, if you fall in the sea, the ice floes will like crush you. And I'm like, that would imply that they might have some sentience, which seems kind of weird, but you just said they were ice floes and it's fine. They're just frozen sea organisms. But now you're suggesting they might move and crush you. What? So that part was weird. But anyway, Phos's whole thing is that they doubt. They doubt their usefulness. And what I liked that Antarcticite told them was like, you're not testing yourself. Like you're not just trying to get me out there to face danger so you can. I thought this was interesting that Phos kind of said, like, are you just trying to get more time with Adamant by getting me in danger? And Antarcticite's like, why would I do that? I'm fine. I'm getting to see them plenty, you know? So I thought that was what was interesting is Phos's line of reasoning there was very human. It was very human. That kind of jealous, like, this is why you're doing this. And Antarcticite's like, why would you think that? And I'm like, that's a very human line of thought for Phos to have. Very naive, but not something that I would expect a regular gemstone to think. And so that's why Antarcticite says we gemstones of low hardness have nothing if not our courage. So we have to be strong and courageous because of our disadvantages. And so then Phos doesn't seem very convinced by all of this. And Phos is like, well, I can only do what I can. And then Antarcticite's like, well, then you'll only ever do what you've always done. So Phos's thing is, if you don't push yourself, you won't grow. And you should use what has been given to you. And that's going to come back later on because Phos does not believe in what has been given to them. And you kind of get why Phos would think that, because so far, everything Phos has been given has turned out to not be very useful. And they've spent their entire life from the other gemstones being told that they're useless. So of course Phos would think that they're useless because that's all that they know. And Antarcticite's kind of the first one to come around and say, no, you just need to adapt and push yourself. Which is such a different viewpoint than Phos has ever had, but it kind of almost feels like it comes too little too late. And then they get influenced by the ice floes, and so it's just even crazier. So Antarcticite works to teach Phos what to do and to make them stronger, which seems to work for a while. And then Antarcticite's like, we'll fix you up and then keep doing our daily work. And they shovel all the pathways and they get everything clear. And then what do they say out there? Says, and because Phos says, you're not very good at working in a team, are you? And then Antarcticite says, well, patrolling the school, we're in the most danger in the hibernation room. And I'm like, what? And Phos like, what are you talking about? The others are frightening in their sleep, especially Borts. So they just walk around like trashing stuff. And you have to put a sheet over them to cover them up. And Phos is like, why would they sleep if I cover them up? And Antarcticite's like, I don't know. I guess it's like my grandmother had a guinea pig named Bubbles. And Bubbles, unfortunately, my grandmother had that guinea pig Pavlovian trained. Every time she would open the refrigerator, she'd get a little piece of lettuce out and she'd give it to Bubbles. Well, Bubbles got trained to know what the sound of the refrigerator door opening was. So every time it opened, she'd go veep, 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 until my grandmother would give her lettuce. And after a while, my grandma got tired of giving her lettuce. And she was like, no, you'll get sick. So she would just get mad. And sometimes my grandmother, she always, before Bubbles went to bed, she'd put a little towel over her cage. And that would be the signal it's time to go to bed. So and sometimes when we'd have like Thanksgiving dinner or something and Bubbles would be like, veep, 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 veep. Like, because the fridge door would be opening and closing all the time. She'd just take the towel and go bloop. And Bubbles would be like, bloop. So it was, I'm assuming it's something like that. But Adamant does the same thing. I don't know how to feel about Adamant crushing their head against the wall, though. But Antarcticite doesn't seem concerned by it. They seem like this happens a while. And so, yeah, their everyday is a lot of work. I love Phos just slowly grinding at the ice that seems to be not a person until while Antarcticite is crushing everything, that's when Phos starts to hear the ice saying, I guess that they'll take care of it all. And that's when the ice speaks up saying, are you all right? I love that the ice is a reflection of Phos, because at first I was like, is that something in the ice? But it's just a reflection. And they're like, oh, the ice floes are minerals just like us. And I was like, at that point I went, wait a minute, hold on, because that they have microorganisms, the ice floes are a sentient being? What? We've been sitting here hacking up a sentient being, and you just were going to conveniently not say any of that to Phos? Excuse me? What? And so then, like, you can vaguely hear them talk, quote unquote. And to be exact, we can hear their sounds, but we can't understand them. And Phos is like, oh no, I understand what they're saying. And what they are saying to us is, it's painful. This is too much. I want to go home. Now, the ice floes dialogue. At first I'm like, oh, the ice can hear you hacking into it. Well, there's a new fear unlocked that I didn't need to know about. And Antarcticite's like, I can't hear that. And Phos like, I can understand everything they say. And that's when Phos is like, this is terrifying. So Adamant's like, oh, you understand the ice floes. Convenient. You understand the sea creatures too. Can't take you anywhere. I have an inkling in the back of my head that I've spoken with things from the sea. That makes me so sad because they don't remember Very. They don't remember Very. They don't remember the brother. They don't remember any of that. So I'm like, the fact that they don't remember that entire encounter and now they've lost their arms. What else are they not going to remember? Are they not going to remember Antarcticite? What? Are they not going to remember those conversations? Memory is such a terrifying thing to tamper with, and it freaks me out. And the fact that Phos is forgetting these important conversations that have happened is terrifying. I feel like they're just going to get whittled down till they're not themselves anymore, and I don't want that for Phos. And Adamant says, I can hear them too. And so then Phos says, well, why don't I just try to get to know the ice floes and ask them to start shouting? Well, from the conversation we've seen them have, that was not a good idea either, because the ice floes seem quite manipulative. And then Adamant's like, no, that sounds very pacifist and idealistic of you. But Adamant says the ice floes have no minds of their own. Instead, they are naturally disposed to reflect the doubts of others and exacerbate them. So Adamant's like, that's why they're called sinners. They don't actually have any of their own thoughts. They're just there to amplify the negative concerns of others and exploit them. Kind of like a predator being like, I'm going to lure my prey into my maw by preening on their self-doubts and then take advantage of them, which is terrifying. And so I guess if you're like, they're like ghosts, they're like ice ghosts, these flows, then that's one thing. But then Adamant says they are but dregs of creatures from long past. So basically they're like the ghosts of humanity. So if you wanted all of the negativity of humanity's ghosts in the form of an ice floe, here you go, episode. This one's for you. What the fudge? No. So he says, still your heart while in their presence. Well, Adamant, by now you should know that Phos ain't gonna steal their heart. Like, why are you putting this faith in Phos? Because you know it's not gonna work. And they're like, okay. I'm like, if I heard that, I'd be like asking a few more questions. And then, of course, they get the little head pat to Antarcticite, and Antarcticite's like, yay, I get head pats too. I do love how happy they seem in that moment. It is very cute. But they're like, Phos is keeping up more than expected. And Phos is like, look at me. But while it may never be so, I can't help but wish Phos had arms to match those legs. And I'm like, why would you say something like that? Why would you say something like that, Antarcticite? I know that they didn't mean anything by it, but Phos has been dealing with all this self-doubt, and you just got done telling Phos about making the most out of what they had, and now you're telling them to get new arms? I was like, wait, what? But why would you say something like that? Instead, Phos just feels horrible. I'm like, you're gonna make Phos forget more things. Stop that. I'm very much like, I hate the concept of self-harm, and it's so sad. Like, you should never feel the obligation to do that. That's so dangerous and so scary. And so please don't do that. Please do not do that. But it's so sad. I'm like, no, Phos, don't harm yourself. Because like when they put the saw next to their arm, I'm like, that's literally like human doubt, like self-harm. Like, don't do that. Oh, I'm like, what are you doing? And there's none of that shell left. And that's when the ice floes like tempt them. They prey on that self-doubt and offer to take their arms, being like, oh, somebody will fix them. You'll be fine. That was terrifying. And then they weren't going to do it, and they end up falling backwards into the ice, and then lo and behold, when Antarcticite pulls them out, the arms are gone. And they were crushed. Like, they were barely in the ice floe, and the ice floe just instantly took them. What the fudge? What the fudge? Why? Why'd they just take the ice floe, not the rest? Why'd they just take the arms, not the rest of them? Why? This episode was terrifying. Terrifying. No, thank you. Nope. Nope. Again, I hate the concept of Phos having their arms taken, because the ice floes are like, you have to change. They basically just say what Phos is saying in their head. They're like, your legs got better, so this will work too. You can change. Somebody can fix them. And they're like, if you don't get better, you're like, you can't be bad forever, which is knowing that it's what Phos is thinking in their head. And the scary part is, I was talking about in the reaction, a lot of what the ice floe is saying, there are a lot of just general negative thoughts. So like you can't be bad forever and you can change and all this. A part of me wondered if it was also like the thoughts of the ice floe when they were human, and like human doubts and human insecurities, and they're just revoicing them, but now they're applying them to Phos. But now Phos has lost even more memories. So what has Phos forgotten about now? And I just have this horrible feeling that the show is going to have Phos keep changing their body to try to become stronger, and then to save Cinnabar, and then it's all going to make them forget about Cinnabar and what they were doing in the first place. Kind of like when Yellow Diamond's like, I don't know why we were fighting in the first place. Like, that's terrifying. And this episode was going along really well. And then once we found out the ice floes were sentient, I was like, this took a dark turn. And now I am terrified for episode 8. I don't know if I'm going to wait, though. I don't know if I'm going to wait or if I'm just going to go ahead and watch it. Part of me wants to just go ahead and watch it. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if I wait or not. But part of me is like, oh, I need to know what's going to happen now that Phos has lost their arms. I need to know. I need to know. I need to know. Okay. Okay. I know you all will have comments down below. And I'm terrified of them, but Adamant knows more than they are letting on. They are just conveniently letting all the gemstones be on a need-to-know basis. And he's like, oh, I'll let you know whenever. And I'm like, what? And I don't know what is going to happen next. I have a bad feeling about Antarcticite, because I feel like Antarcticite, when they're working with Adamant, things were fine. But we just talked a few episodes ago, like when you're in groups of 3, that's not a good thing. And I'm like, now we have a group of 3. So that makes me scared too. I don't get good vibes. I don't get good vibes. This isn't supposed to be a horror series. But it's making me scared. So yeah, I really like Antarcticite. I'm terrified for them. I really love Phos. I'm terrified for them. What are they going to forget now? Maybe they'll forget their intrusive thoughts. Maybe that'll be the thing we forget. But I don't want them to forget Cinnabar. And I want them to interact with Cinnabar. Son of a bitch. The show is stressing me out. But you all knew that when you voted for this, I'm sure. So we'll see where this heads and what we get next episode, but I'm terrified. So, the end card was just them putting up the sheets. Pretty simple. Pretty simple. The white sheets, all that reflective, all that good stuff, very angelic. Rule of 8 is next week, y'all, and I'm not ready. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll see you all again next week for episode 8 of Land of the Lustrous. Bye!